Hello, this is Ghost Town Bob. I'm here today to talk to you a little bit more about uh, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and the Wild Bunch. This is part of my series where I give you the truth and celebrate about Butch Cassidy. I also celebrate legends about Butch Cassidy and expose the myths about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and the Wild Bunch. So let's get right to it. My last video in this series, we talked about when the name Wild Bunch was first instituted, and the first quote unquote official uh, name of Wild Bunch was applied to Butch Cassidy and his gang. And in that video, which you can go ahead and watch, basically I determined that it was around the 1897, 1898 time period that Butch Cassidy was, or the Wild Bunch was first called the Wild Bunch, both in the newspapers and locally. But we didn't really go into exactly why it was called the Wild Bunch and the reasons for that. And so in this video today, I want to go into why Butch Cassidy's gang was called the Wild Bunch and not something else. Uh, of course, through the history of the Old West outlaws and particularly the outlaws in Wyoming and Utah, several different names were used for these various gangs. For instance, the outlaws that hung around down around Robbers Roost in southeastern Utah were called the Robbers Roost Gang. The outlaws that hung out in Wyoming, uh, in uh, in north central Wyoming, were usually called the Hole in the Wall Gang, and the outlaws in uh, the Browns Park area and uh, the area in Wyoming, Idaho, and Utah, mostly in Utah and Idaho in Browns Park, were called variously the Browns Park Gang. They had a lot of different names for that particular group. Sometimes it was called the McCarty Gang because Tom McCarty also hung around in that area, or at least they thought he hung around in that area. Uh, but more particularly, it's been known as the Wild Bunch, and the Wild Bunch gradually grew to refer to all of the outlaws in Robbers Roost, Brown's Hole, and in the Hole in the Wall. But that was not until later. The Wild Bunch originally referred to just specifically the outlaws that were in the Browns Park area in Utah and Wyoming and sometimes or Utah and Colorado and sometimes up into Wyoming into the Bags, Savory, Dixon area. So uh, last time we talked about that the first use of the name Wild Bunch for these outlaws was in 1897 uh, when it was referred to uh, shortly after the McKee brothers, four brothers, James, Joe, Tom, and George, started going around killing sheep from various sheep herders, killing at least 25 sheep and injuring 50 to 75 more sheep, trying to drive them off of the cattle ranges in what was variously referred to in the West as the cattleman sheep wars. They were cattlemen and they didn't like the sheep, and so they were trying to get rid of them. And so they terrorized the local sheep ranchers and killed off many sheep to try to drive them off of the range. Anyway, in the newspapers, it was first termed the Brown's Hole Gang, And the outlaws around Brown's Hole was first coined or used in the newspapers around that time, referring to the gang of outlaws, not specifically to the McKee brothers, but to the gang of outlaws that were hanging around the Browns Hole area. In fact, in the July 26, 1897 issue of the Salt Lake Republican, excuse me, Salt Lake Herald Republican, it was actually usually called by as the name Salt Lake Herald, uh, quoting the Vernal Express, it says that it was the opinion that the McKee boys were uh, part of, or the work was done by the McKee brothers were part of the Wild Bunch. It says specifically, uh, it was the opinion of a great many that the work was done by the Wild Bunch. Some people could say, well, that was just the McKee brothers, but they're referring to the greater Wild Bunch that the McKee brothers may or may not have been a part of. Uh, but then it goes on and says to say that as no such gang is known to exist, only in the imagination of sheepmen, the sheepmen are satisfied that they have the right men. So actually, that kind of sounds like it separates the McKee brothers from the Wild Bunch just a little bit. Some people are saying, well, it was the Wild Bunch that did it, but the sheepherders were saying, well, no, it was these McKee brothers that did it. Of course, the McKee brothers were eventually brought in and tried uh, for for killing those sheep. Anyway, that was the first mention of it in the newspapers. But how did they come to refer to the group of outlaws in that area uh, as the Wild Bunch? That's what I'm examining a little bit today, and of course, by the next year, in uh, by March 7th of 1898, uh, it was called uh, the Wild Bunch by many people, and including the Denver Rocky Mountain News, the reporter that was reporting on the Rocky Mountain News reported on Wyoming affairs, specifically called the gang the Wild Bunch and mentioned that Butch Cassidy was the head or involved with the Wild Bunch. It says that the company is known as the Wild Bunch, with Butch Cassidy as its captain. So uh, that is when I'd say that the first time that it was officially referred to as the Wild Bunch in connection with Butch Cassidy uh, was was in the Denver Rocky Mountain News of July or March 7th, 1898. How did they become known as the Wild Bunch? Well, it's kind of obvious in a way that it was some name that was coined up for that wild bunch of outlaws around Browns Park. In fact, Pearl Baker, in her book, I've got that around here somewhere. Pearl Baker, what did I do with you? Oh, that's up here. She says on page 188 uh, here, she's of the opinion that this is what she says about Butch Cassidy. This is on page 188. Butch Cassidy emerged from the Wyoming penitentiary on January 16th, 1896. Uh, he set out for Browns Park to recruit the Wild Bunch. Just kind of bad wording for her there. So called because they raised such hell when they came to town to celebrate in Baggs, Vernal, or other frontier towns. Saloon keepers called them that Wild Bunch from Wild's Park and let them shoot up the place as much as they pleased, well knowing that they would come back and pay for all of the damage. So that's what she says. And I think I tend to agree with her on that, that it was probably coined to refer to that wild bunch of outlaws that were out terrorizing the local towns and shooting them up. Uh, I think it can be traced back to the time period from 1896 through the middle of 1897 as to when that term was coined, and that it was used for the Wild Bunch. Of course, the Montpelier robbery happened in 1896, where Butch Cassidy, Bub Meeks, and Elsie Lay held up the Montpelier, Idaho bank and made off with several $1,000s. They did this to help pay the lawyer expenses for Butch's, I guess, and Elsie Lay's good friend, Matt Warner, who had been accused of murder in Utah shortly before that and was in jail and awaiting trial. And so they held up the Montpelier Bank, got off with it using their usual tactics of acting as wild cowboys when they came in and robbed the bank. Then after that, April 21st, excuse me, April 21st, 1897, the Castlegate uh, robbery occurred in Castlegate, Utah, where the Pleasant Valley Coal Mining Company payroll was robbed by two men who were immediately identified as Butch Cassidy and Elsie Lay. Of course, some people refute that Butch Cassidy and Elsie Lay actually did the robbery itself, but I think the evidence is pretty strong that they did commit the robbery, and those historians that seem to doubt that they have the reasons for doing so. But I think the fact that points that it was Butch Cassidy and Elsie Lay that pulled off the robbery. And then shortly after that, of course, that was another robbery that cowboys came in, they acted wild, raced horses up and down the street to the road. In the case of Castlegate, it wasn't particularly a street, and uh, and that for several days before the robbery, and and acted wild, and then uh, right after that robbery, once they got away on July 15th, 1897, Charlie Gill's store in Fort Bridger, Wyoming, was robbed. Butch Cassidy didn't take part in that. Neither did Elsie Lay, but Bub Meeks and John Henry were a couple of the outlaws that were hanging around Brown's Hole that were associating with Butch Cassidy, were responsible for holding up that store. Bub Meeks eventually was caught and tried for that offense and sent to the Idaho State Prison. Uh, well, actually, he was caught for that, and then he went up for the robbery of the Montpelier Bank, and then he went to the Idaho State Prison. Anyway, so 21st of April, 1897, and a wild robbery in Castlegate. Then the 15th of June, 1897, and then the McKee brothers, during the first or second week in July, started committing their uh, depredations against the local sheep ranchers in the Vernal Browns Park area, and uh, and then right after that, during the last week of July, several members of the outlaws that were hanging around Brown's Hole went first to Dixon, Wyoming, and then to Baggs, Wyoming, and shot up both towns. This is a well-known fact. It was something that was reported on in many papers at the time, and they were also uh, it was also known who it was that came into town and shot up the town, and it was, of course, Butch Cassidy and some of the other outlaws in the area. And excuse me. and also uh, very possibly Harry Alonso, aka Harry Longabaugh, aka the Sundance Kid, may have participated in some of these wild revelings at the time, uh, acting wild in these towns, as he was known to work for the Readers and other local ranchers in the Savory Dixon area. Uh, and it was around this time that it is known that he was an outlaw, and that many suspected that he participated in the Bella Fourche bank robbery in Bella Fourche, South Dakota, uh, about the same time. So I think that's basically where the name Wild Bunch came from, was the wild activities of these outlaws. They weren't hidden away in vast uh, uh, caverns or something. They're out parading through towns, shooting places up, acting wild. And so, of course, the local citizens, particularly in Vernal, would say, well, yeah, it's that Wild Bunch in Brown's Hole that was responsible for these uh, various things that were happening at the time. And then, of course, by uh, March of 1898, of course, that name stuck, and probably they were starting to refer to themselves as that Wild Bunch from Brown's Hole, or the Wild Bunch in general, to refer to themselves as those outlaws, or that was their group or their gang that they refer to themselves as. So that's my opinion. This is an opinion piece. I am as factual as can be about what I say, but of course, everything when you're dealing with history uh, is opinion in one way or the other, and that's my opinion on that, and I will stand by it. And I will see you next time.